In the heart of America, where monuments rise to heroes, a stark truth often goes unseen: the shattering fall of those who once stood tallest. John MacAllister, a name once whispered with reverence among the elite Marine Force Recon, a man whose chest bore the weight of countless medals and whose spirit embodied the very essence of duty and leadership. He was the kind of warrior who would charge headfirst into chaos, not for glory, but to protect the lives under his command. Yet, here he stands, a ghost in his own land, haggard and forgotten, now accused of a crime that seems utterly incongruous with his past. What unspoken tragedy could strip a decorated hero of everything, leaving him to fade into the bleak winter of Harmony Creek? At 67, MacAllister was a shadow of his former self, a phantom drifting almost unseen through the weary, forgotten veins of Harmony Creek, Ohio. This once vibrant industrial town, much like Mac himself, now bore the scars of time. Boarded up storefronts, rusting factories, and a palpable sense of abandonment hanging heavy in the air. Each morning, his battered duffel bag, a loyal relic of forgotten battles, would swing over his bony shoulder as he shuffled through back alleys and forgotten streets. The bag's seams, much like Mac's own spirit, were frayed and tattered, a silent testament to a life unraveling. The descent into this different kind of invisibility had begun with a devastating personal loss. Ever since the day Sarah, his beloved wife and his anchor in a tumultuous world, lost her brutal battle with cancer, a battle Mac believed might have been won had the VA hospital not tragically misdiagnosed her for months. He had sat by her side, a silent sentinel, watching helplessly as the light drained from her eyes with each passing day. When the end finally came, an unyielding silence consumed his soul. True to Sarah's final selfless wishes, he sold their modest brick house on Treeline Avenue, gathered every last penny from the sale, and donated it all to the local animal rescue shelter she had adored, a place she called her little slice of heaven. Afterward, Mac simply vanished, not into the earth, but into a different kind of invisibility, the kind reserved for the brokenhearted, the overlooked, and the profoundly forgotten. Some battles end with medals, Mac once murmured to a kindly church volunteer, a fleeting moment of vulnerability on a snowy morning as she offered him a cup of coffee. Others end with silence. He never begged, a defiant refusal to surrender the last shred of dignity he possessed. His survival was a patchwork of discarded aluminum cans, spare change scavenged from sidewalks, and the quiet, unspoken kindness from places like the Rusty Spoon Diner, where the waitresses, with weary but empathetic smiles, would slip him coffee and an occasional sandwich without a word. Yet for most people, the sight of him was an uncomfortable truth. They chose to cross the street, their gazes averted, rather than acknowledge the tattered uniform of a forgotten hero. As December's bitter cold settled deep into Harmony Creek's very bones, Mac's already frail body grew weaker. His coat, a relic from better days, was now utterly threadbare, offering little protection against the biting winds. His worn-out boots, once strong and sturdy, leaked snowmelt with every step, chilling him to the bone. Hunger, a relentless feral beast, gnawed at him with an unrelenting persistence, a constant, agonizing companion. By the third day, without a real meal, his hands, once steady and precise in combat, shook so violently that he struggled even to lift them. The world spun around him, a dizzying blur of exhaustion and gnawing emptiness. That afternoon, desperate and disoriented, MacAllister stumbled into the Daily Bread grocery, a squat, tired-looking building with a sagging awning and a neon open sign that flickered erratically, as broken as his own spirit. The air inside smelled of old produce and stale bread, mixed with the sharp scent of industrial cleaner. But to Mac, it was an oasis, a shimmering mirage of warmth and sustenance. He lingered near the produce section, his eyes sharp even in their exhaustion, scanning a bin of bruised apples and day-old rolls piled haphazardly in a crate marked 50% off. His stomach twisted painfully, a hollow ache that echoed the emptiness within him. No one seemed to notice him. Mr. Henderson, the owner, a man known for his meticulous eye and short temper, was preoccupied, helping an elderly woman at the cash register. The lone teenage stockboy was diligently stacking cans at the far end of the aisle, lost in his own world. MacAllister hesitated, the moral weight of the moment pressing down on his shoulders, a silent battle raging within him. But the hunger, a primal, overwhelming force, was stronger. With trembling fingers, he slipped a battered apple into the inside pocket of his tattered jacket. Then, a hard roll. His hands were so cold, so stiff, that he could barely fasten the coat over his meager prize. He made his way toward the automatic doors, head bowed low, hoping to disappear as silently as he had entered. But then, a voice, sharp and accusatory, barked through the quiet store. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" MacAllister froze. Mr. Henderson, his face purple with anger, marched directly toward him, his eyes blazing with fury. MacAllister stammered, but the words caught in his throat. Useless. It didn't matter. Henderson had already reached for the phone, his fingers stabbing at the keys with furious precision. "Police now!" Henderson growled, his voice echoing through the silent store. "We don't tolerate thieves around here." MacAllister didn't resist. There was no fight left in him. He simply stood there, hollow-eyed and utterly exhausted, his meager prize still tucked under his coat. Within minutes, the piercing wail of a siren ripped through the quiet afternoon, and a squad car screeched to a halt outside. The harsh fluorescent lights of the grocery store flickered, casting long, distorted shadows as two officers entered. Officer Miller, a burly man with a no-nonsense buzz cut and a jaded look in his eyes, immediately took control, speaking loudly into his radio. But his partner, Officer Anya Sharma, a young woman whose keen brown eyes seemed to miss nothing, immediately spotted something peeking from beneath MacAllister's collar, a familiar glint of metal. "You served?" she asked quietly, her voice a stark contrast to Miller's booming commands. MacAllister managed a small, almost imperceptible nod. "Long time ago," he rasped, his voice rough with disuse. "When it mattered." Officer Sharma hesitated for a moment, her brow furrowed with a flicker of recognition, a silent contemplation. But procedure, she knew, was procedure. And so, before the scattered evening shoppers of Harmony Creek, many of whom averted their gaze in discomfort or mild disgust, John MacAllister was handcuffed and escorted from Paxton's grocery, his dignity stripped away like an old tattered coat. Outside, some people stared with a morbid curiosity. Others looked away, uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before them. No one stepped forward. No one asked if there was more to this story, more to the man they now saw as merely a thief. The mugshot captured not just Samuel's gaunt, exhausted face, but the deep lines etched there, not just by age, but by profound sorrow, unbearable loneliness, and the bitter sting of a country that had once saluted him, but now barely acknowledged his existence. That night, as he sat alone in the municipal holding cell, the air thick with the smell of stale disinfectant and despair, MacAllister carefully drew out a small, tattered photograph from inside his shirt pocket. It was Sarah. Her face smiled up at him, soft, bright, and forever young, a beacon from a life long past. He whispered into the cold, empty room, his voice barely audible. "I'm trying, love. I'm trying." Outside the barred window, the winter wind howled a mournful song, and somewhere beyond that, destiny, unseen and unheard, began to stir. The morning in the Harmony Creek Municipal Court dawned a gray, mechanical thing, mirroring the grim reality of the lives it processed. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their harsh glow flickering erratically, casting long, stark shadows across the worn floor tiles. The air itself seemed heavy, with the weight of weary resignation echoing with the shuffled steps of the defeated, the desperate, and the truly forgotten. John MacAllister shuffled in with the others, his boots scraping tiredly along the floor, each sound a testament to his profound exhaustion. The same tattered jacket, now stiff from last night's damp, biting cold, hung loosely from his bony shoulders, offering little comfort. His wrists ached, a dull, constant throb from the handcuffs, though the arresting officers Miller and Sharma had not been unkind. It wasn't overt cruelty that bruised him, he knew. It was indifference, a far more insidious pain. There was no anxious family waiting for him on the cracked wooden benches, no whispered encouragement from loyal friends in the gallery. Just MacAllister, hunched small and solitary at the defendant's table, his battered duffel bag tucked protectively between his scuffed boots, as if it might still shield something precious and fragile inside. The clerk, a young woman named Brenda with harried eyes and a voice flattened by countless repetitions, droned through the morning's docket, each case a nameless, faceless entry in a long bureaucratic list. Case 19842. The State versus John MacAllister. When his name was called, MacAllister slowly stood, swaying slightly, his knees feeling like brittle sticks about to give way. A quiet murmur rippled through the courtroom, a barely perceptible wave of curiosity and mild judgment. A few curious glances landed on him, then slid quickly away, some carrying a faint hint of disgust, others an empty, detached pity. No one truly saw him. At the prosecutor's table stood a young man named David Maxwell, crisp in his freshly pressed blue suit, a new bar exam certificate still metaphorically clinging to his lapel. Maxwell was eager, ambitious, and clearly saw MacAllister's case as a straightforward procedural matter to be efficiently moved along the morning's judicial conveyor belt. He spoke briskly, his voice devoid of emotion, as if MacAllister were merely an inanimate object on a checklist. "Your Honor," Maxwell began, his gaze fixed firmly on the judge. The defendant was apprehended while committing a petty theft at the Daily Bread grocery. Surveillance footage unequivocally confirms the theft. The defendant, John MacAllister, has no fixed address, no verifiable employment, and a history of prior minor citations for loitering and public intoxication. The state therefore recommends remand until trial to prevent further offenses and ensure public safety. Judge Eleanor Vance, a stern figure with an imposing silver mane and wire-framed glasses, barely glanced at MacAllister at first. Her fingers, accustomed to the rhythmic tap-tap-tap against stacks of mundane arrest reports, moved with practiced efficiency. She flipped open MacAllister's file, expecting to find the same weary parade of sadness, desperation, and petty crime she encountered daily. It was a routine she knew by heart, a grim symphony of human failing. But then, something slipped loose between the papers. It wasn't a document or a legal brief. It was a worn, scratched military dog tag attached to a thin, tarnished chain. It clattered quietly onto the judge's dark wooden bench, a small metallic sound that seemed to echo disproportionately in the hushed courtroom. Vance stilled. Her fingers, which had been tapping rhythmically, froze. She leaned forward, slowly, deliberately, and for the first time looked directly at MacAllister. She really looked. The name stamped into the cold metal caught her breath, pulling her back through years and memories. MacAllister, John J. USMC, blood type O positive. Something deep in Judge Vance's chest stirred. A memory she hadn't called on in years. The searing heat of a desert sun. The distant crackle of gunfire. The acrid stench of diesel and blood. A different battlefield, a different time, but the echoes were undeniable. Vance was not a veteran herself, but her father had served in Vietnam, and his own dog tags lay in a velvet box on her dresser. She remembered his nightmares, the quiet strength that sometimes gave way to unspeakable grief. This wasn't just a name, it was a connection, a ghost from a past she understood intimately. "Request a 5-minute recess," Judge Vance said abruptly, her voice cutting through the prosecutor's mid-sentence with an unexpected sharpness. The clerk blinked, startled, her harried eyes wide with surprise. Maxwell hesitated, confused, his carefully constructed argument momentarily derailed. Judge Vance didn't wait for approval. She rapped her gavel once, sharply and finally, the sound echoing with unexpected authority. "Recess granted. Counsel approach," she ordered, rising from her bench and disappearing into her chambers, leaving a stunned courtroom in her wake. MacAllister stood there dazed, a strange tremor running through him. Around him, the courtroom buzzed with quiet confusion, an unusual departure from its usual mechanical rhythm. No one had ever stopped the relentless march of procedure for him before. No one had ever interrupted a system already moving with impersonal efficiency to swallow him whole. He sat slowly, his movements hesitant, not daring to hope, not daring to think too far ahead, lest the fragile seedling of a new possibility wither before it could even take root. Meanwhile, behind the heavy oak doors of her chambers, Judge Vance stood motionless, staring down at the military dog tag cradled in her palm. John MacAllister. She closed her eyes and let the years roll back, not just to a distant battlefield, but to her own family's history of service. Her father, a proud Army veteran, had carried his own dog tags and had often spoken of the silent brotherhood that bound soldiers together. Her grandfather, a Marine who fought in Korea, had taught her the meaning of sacrifice. The name on the tag connected her to a legacy, a responsibility she suddenly felt weigh heavily on her shoulders. She pictured the muddy boots, the raw screams, the burning stench of diesel and blood. She remembered the stories of unseen heroes. She could almost feel the weight of a wounded comrade being hauled from a burning vehicle, ignoring flying bullets, ignoring one's own wounds. It had been men like John MacAllister who had bled and fought and saved others without thought of reward. And now he sat in an orange jumpsuit, his dignity reduced to a bruised apple and a stale roll. Judge Vance sat heavily in her large leather chair, the open file still on her desk, its stark entries stabbing at her heart. Discharged honorably, 2005, 3 tours overseas, Bronze Star recipient, and then the line that truly twisted the knife. Termination of VA benefits, 2007, reason, no known address. The next line was the most damning of all. Case closed, closed. As if a man's life, his very essence, could simply be filed away and forgotten because he no longer had a mailing address. It was a brutal indictment of a system that claimed to care for its heroes. Vance ran a trembling hand through her silver hair, a gesture of profound anguish. "God forgive us," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the quiet chamber. She knew, with chilling certainty in that moment, that the law, the cold, indifferent law, had abandoned John MacAllister long before this petty theft ever happened. This was not about a stolen apple. This was about a stolen life. For Judge Vance, this wasn't just a legal case. It was a profound personal reckoning. She realized that the true measure of justice wasn't merely about upholding the law, but about recognizing the profound human story behind the charges. It was about seeing beyond the immediate act to the systemic failures that had led a man like MacAllister to such a desperate point. Her decision to intervene wasn't just judicial discretion, it was an act of moral courage, a silent vow to rectify a wrong that had festered in the shadows for far too long. In that moment, the courtroom transformed from a place of sterile judgment to a crucible of potential redemption. Outside, MacAllister hunched further into his seat, feeling the hostile, judging air of the courtroom pressing down on him. A young woman in the gallery, perhaps a law student or a budding reporter, watched him with wide, curious eyes, a flicker of something akin to recognition in her gaze. But still, no one spoke, no one approached. The minutes stretched painfully, an eternity in the sterile silence. At last, the heavy oak doors of the judge's chambers opened, and Judge Vance emerged. But something about her had irrevocably changed. Gone was the detached professionalism, the mechanical efficiency. Instead, she walked slowly, deliberately, her face set with a profound gravity that hushed even the whispered side conversations in the courtroom. She took her seat, her gaze fixed directly on MacAllister, an intensity that made him instinctively straighten. "Mr. MacAllister," she said, her voice low but firm, resonating with a newfound purpose. "Before this court proceeds..." The morning air in Harmony Creek Municipal Court still held the chill of winter, but something profound had shifted. The sterile, impersonal atmosphere had given way to a palpable current of anticipation, a silent tension that hummed through the room. John MacAllister, shackled in the transport van bumping along the icy streets, had expected nothing different from previous days. More hearings, more procedural steps, another slow, draining erosion of his spirit. But as the bailiff, his usual gruff demeanor softened by an almost tender respect, unshackled him outside courtroom 3, the simple, direct command resonated deeply. "Straight inside, Sergeant." "Sergeant." The word struck MacAllister like a sudden, gentle hand to the chest, a long-forgotten echo of his former identity. Inside, the atmosphere was profoundly different from any courtroom he had ever known. The usual sterile coldness had given way to a palpable warmth, a shared sense of purpose. The courtroom was full, but not with angry citizens or bored lawyers. Instead, it was filled with soldiers. 3 Marine officers, impeccably dressed in their pristine dress blues, stood at rigid attention at the back. Their sharp creases and polished metals a stark, gleaming contrast to the subdued lighting. Behind them, a crowd of men and women in civilian clothes gathered, many wearing old proud veteran ball caps, others holding small American flags folded neatly against their chests, their eyes fixed on MacAllister with a gaze of profound respect. He stopped short, overwhelmed, a wave of unfamiliar emotion washing over him. No one had ever shown him such reverence before, not in decades. At his defense table, a sharply dressed woman, her posture radiating quiet confidence, sat with a leather briefcase beside her chair. She rose fluidly when she saw him, her gaze meeting his with a calm, strong resolve. "Staff Sergeant MacAllister," she said, her voice clear and resonant, filling the courtroom. "My name is Rebecca Thorne from the Veterans Legal Defense Network. I'm here to represent you." MacAllister blinked, stunned, his mind struggling to process the unexpected turn of events. I don't have money for a lawyer," he stammered, the words feeling clumsy on his tongue. "You don't need it, Sergeant. You have the truth." At the bench, Judge Eleanor Vance, her silver hair catching the light, adjusted her glasses and nodded at MacAllister, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. "Mr. MacAllister," she said, her voice clear and steady, resonating with a newfound authority that commanded attention. "This court has been made aware of extraordinary circumstances regarding your history and service." Prosecutor David Maxwell, looking visibly uncomfortable, his face pale, didn't even try to interrupt. His youthful ambition had been eclipsed by a profound, uncomfortable truth. Judge Vance continued, her gaze sweeping across the hushed courtroom. "We will be hearing critical testimony today on your behalf, and the court will act accordingly. Furthermore," the judge added, her voice gaining a quiet power, "this court is requesting immediate assistance from the Veterans Legal Defense Network to provide Mr. MacAllister with pro bono representation effective immediately." Gasps fluttered through the courtroom, a collective gasp of surprise and relief. MacAllister blinked, still not fully understanding the magnitude of what was happening. He sat slowly, his body still, but his mind a whirlwind of confusion and a nascent, fragile hope. Judge Vance leaned forward slightly, her voice softening just a fraction, directed solely at him. "You are not invisible here, Staff Sergeant." The title, Staff Sergeant, hung in the air, heavy with meaning, a sacred incantation. MacAllister bowed his head, hiding the sudden, unbearable sting in his eyes. He felt a tear, hot and unexpected, trace a path down his weathered cheek. Rebecca Thorne placed a reassuring hand on MacAllister's arm as Colonel Robert Davis, one of the Marine officers in dress blues, took the stand. In measured, precise terms, Colonel Davis detailed MacAllister's valor, his profound sacrifices, his unwavering loyalty to his fellow Marines and to civilians alike during his multiple tours overseas. He presented hard evidence, meticulously documented, that MacAllister's VA pension had been wrongfully terminated years ago, not due to any fault of his own, but due to a bureaucratic oversight, the infamous no known address clause that had effectively erased him from the system. This error, he argued, robbed MacAllister not only of financial security, but also of the vital mental health care he so desperately needed to cope with the unseen wounds of war, the insidious grip of PTSD. The injustice inflicted upon this man, Colonel Davis finished, his voice ringing with quiet, powerful conviction, is not merely a clerical error, it is a moral failure, a betrayal of trust, and it demands immediate correction. The words hung in the courtroom's heavy silence, a truth that transcended legalities. Judge Vance's voice, thick with emotion, broke slightly as she spoke. This court recognizes Staff Sergeant John MacAllister not as a vagrant or criminal, but as a decorated hero whose dignity we collectively failed to honor. She turned to Prosecutor Maxwell. "Mr. Maxwell, do you have anything further?" The young man, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, shook his head. "The state moves to dismiss all charges with prejudice." The gavel fell once, then twice, sharp and final, sealing the words into official record. "Dismissed." Gone. MacAllister stood there uncertain as the room erupted, not into boisterous applause, but into something far deeper, more profound. A quiet rustling of people rising to their feet, hands pressed respectfully over hearts, heads bowed in silent reverence. The Marine officers, their faces etched with pride, saluted him, not out of pity, but as one warrior recognizing another. For the first time in almost 2 decades, John MacAllister stood tall, unbroken, and truly seen. This extraordinary moment in the courtroom highlights the transformative power of empathy and institutional accountability. It demonstrates that when individuals within a system choose compassion over indifference, profound injustices can be rectified. The collective act of recognition from the courtroom audience, rising in a silent salute, was not merely an acknowledgement of a veteran's service, but a powerful unifying statement that a society's strength is measured by how it treats its most vulnerable heroes. It's a testament to the idea that true justice extends beyond legal technicalities, reaching into the realm of human dignity and moral responsibility. The story of John MacAllister did not end in that courtroom. It was merely reborn. Outside the courthouse windows, fresh snow began to fall, slow, quiet, and pure, blanketing Harmony Creek in a pristine white. It felt like a cleansing, a promise of renewal. For the first time in years, MacAllister felt something he had nearly forgotten. Not yet full-blown hope, but the fragile, tender memory of it. And sometimes he realized that was enough to start. That night, in the silence of his now less lonely cell, MacAllister sat on the narrow bunk, the harsh light softened by his quiet contemplation. He cradled the photograph of Sarah in his rough hands, her smile still radiant after all these years, warming the chilled corners of his heart. "Found my way back," he whispered, tracing her image with his thumb. "Just like you said I would." Her voice, so vivid in his memory, echoed from some soft, worn place inside him. "If you're lost, Mac, it's not forever. I'll wait for you." These words, her enduring comfort during his darkest deployments, now felt less like a distant memory and more like a present truth. Across town, in his dimly lit chambers, Judge Eleanor Vance worked tirelessly. She had pulled every relevant document, her resolve fortified by the profound shame and responsibility she felt. She personally oversaw the immediate filing of a petition to reinstate MacAllister's full veterans benefits retroactively. The Veterans Legal Defense Network, led by Rebecca Thorne, worked alongside her, moving mountains of bureaucracy that once seemed immovable. The VA, faced with overwhelming evidence and unprecedented public pressure after MacAllister's story hit the national news, issued a formal apology, the first of its kind, acknowledging the grievous mishandling of MacAllister's case. A check for nearly $278,000 in back pay, representing years of unpaid benefits, was delivered by hand. But more importantly, John MacAllister was immediately enrolled in a specialized veterans housing program, offered comprehensive medical care, and introduced to a vibrant community of fellow veterans who welcomed him without judgment, with an understanding born of shared experience. It was a lifeline, a bridge back to a world he thought he had lost forever. However, the road to true healing was long and complex. MacAllister's physical wounds were evident, but the unseen scars of PTSD ran far deeper. He struggled with nightmares that relived combat, moments of extreme anxiety in crowds, and a profound distrust born of years of neglect. The specialized veterans housing program was crucial, offering not just a roof over his head, but a structured environment with access to therapists specializing in military trauma. He began weekly sessions with Dr. Evelyn Reed, a compassionate psychologist who helped him slowly unravel the knots of fear and guilt that had bound him for decades. Through Dr. Reed's patient guidance and the unwavering camaraderie of his fellow veterans, MacAllister began to understand that his greatest battles weren't just fought on distant sands, but within the silent chambers of his own mind. He learned that true strength wasn't about suppressing pain, but about confronting it. head on, with courage and the shared burden of brotherhood. It was in these raw, vulnerable moments that the first seeds of true internal healing began to sprout, replacing years of buried torment with the quiet promise of peace. One morning during a group therapy session with other veterans, a seemingly small incident brought a breakthrough. A younger veteran struggling with anger issues lashed out, throwing a chair across the room. MacAllister instinctively moved to block it, a silent protective reflex. Dr. Reed noted his reaction, gently probing the underlying instinct. This led MacAllister to speak, for the first time in years, about the mortar attack where he shielded his comrades, a memory he had buried deep. The shared vulnerability within the group, the quiet nods of understanding from fellow veterans who bore similar scars, became a powerful catalyst for his healing. He wasn't alone in his struggle anymore. Another unexpected challenge arose in his financial recovery. While the back pay was significant, MacAllister felt overwhelmed. He had lived without money for so long that managing such a large sum felt alien, even threatening. Rebecca Thorne arranged for a financial advisor, a retired Marine, to guide him. This advisor, Mr. Peterson, understood not just the numbers, but the veteran's mindset, patiently explaining budgeting, investments, and the security his benefits would now provide. It was a slow process, but for the first time, MacAllister felt a sense of control over his future, a stability he hadn't known since Sarah's passing. Learning to navigate the complexities of his newfound financial stability, MacAllister discovered a different kind of freedom, the freedom from constant worry, the quiet dignity that came with self-sufficiency. It wasn't about the money itself, but about reclaiming control over a life that had long been defined by scarcity and desperation. This journey, guided by Mr. Peterson's patient wisdom, was as much about rebuilding his trust in the world as it was about rebuilding his bank account. The reestablishment of his VA benefits also brought access to cutting-edge medical treatments for chronic pain, a legacy of his combat injuries. Dr. Lena Hansen, a VA physician, tailored a comprehensive plan combining physical therapy, acupuncture, and non-opioid pain management strategies. The daily pain, once a dull roar, slowly began to subside, allowing MacAllister to regain some physical mobility and, with it, a renewed sense of possibility. He even started volunteering at the animal rescue shelter, a quiet, almost sacred act of honoring Sarah's memory. Caring for the animals brought him a profound sense of peace, a connection to unconditional love that mirrored the quiet devotion he and Sarah once shared. As his physical pain subsided, a profound sense of purpose began to reawaken within MacAllister. Volunteering at the animal shelter, a place so dear to Sarah, he found solace in unconditional love and silent companionship. Each wagging tail, every purr against his hand, was a gentle reminder of the simple, profound joys that had been missing from his life. It was here, amidst the quiet innocence of forgotten creatures, that MacAllister began to understand that healing wasn't just about recovering what was lost, but about discovering new ways to give, to connect, and to find meaning in every breath. The most profound healing, however, came with the return of Ellie, Sarah's niece. Ellie, a young woman now working as a social worker, had been tirelessly searching for MacAllister for years after Sarah's passing, haunted by his sudden disappearance. She had tracked down distant relatives, scoured homeless shelters in surrounding cities, and tirelessly contacted veterans organizations. Her search was a testament to family loyalty and an unwavering belief that no one, especially a hero, should be lost. Their reunion was at the courthouse, a moment of raw, overwhelming emotion. Ellie rushed forward, her tear-bright eyes mirroring his own, throwing her arms around him and clutching him fiercely. For a moment, MacAllister stood stiff, stunned by the warmth of human contact after so many years of emotional desolation. Then, slowly, almost fearfully, his arms came up to hold her. "It's me, Ellie, Caroline's niece," she cried, her voice breaking. He pulled back to study her face, and there it was, the trace of Sarah's laughter in the corners of her mouth, the same stubborn spark in her brown eyes. "I found you," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "I've been looking for you since Aunt Caroline passed. You just disappeared. I thought there was nothing left," he rasped, the words thick with emotion. "You're not alone," Ellie said fiercely, her voice firm with conviction. "Not anymore." Reporters snapped photos as the unlikely reunion unfolded, but no one intruded. Even they seemed to understand that this was sacred ground, a moment of profound personal healing unfolding publicly. Ellie's unwavering devotion became a new anchor for MacAllister, connecting him back to the family he thought he had lost, a tangible bridge from his solitary despair to a future he hadn't dared to imagine. The Harmony Creek City Hall stood adorned with banners proclaiming Harmony Creek remembers honoring our own, fluttering proudly in the brisk spring air. It wasn't just a ceremony, it was a profound act of collective healing, a public testament to a town's awakened conscience. Children, their faces bright with innocent excitement, waved small American flags, their laughter echoing through the square. Old veterans, some frail and stooped, had dusted off their worn uniforms, their medals gleaming with quiet pride, gathering with other community members. Businesses had donated food, local musicians played uplifting tunes, and the air buzzed with a reverence usually reserved for forgotten national holidays. When John MacAllister stepped onto the makeshift stage, he was no longer the gaunt, disheveled man who had shuffled into the grocery store. He wore a new, crisply pressed marine dress uniform, his numerous medals gleaming against the dark blue fabric, each a silent witness to battles fought and sacrifices made. His posture was straight, proud, yet he carried himself with an undeniable humility, his eyes scanning the sea of faces before him. The crowd erupted into a standing ovation, a wave of applause that rolled like thunder through the town, a powerful, emotional crescendo that lasted for what felt like an eternity. Judge Eleanor Vance, her own eyes glistening with unshed tears, stood beside him. She presented him with a plaque, simple, elegant, but searing with truth. Inscribed upon it were words that echoed the collective conscience of a town finally awakening. For service, sacrifice, and unseen valor, Harmony Creek remembers. Her voice, steady despite the emotion, spoke of his profound impact, not just as a soldier, but as a man whose silent suffering had become a catalyst for change. She publicly acknowledged the systemic failures, the oversight that had allowed such a hero to fall through the cracks, setting a powerful precedent for accountability. MacAllister cleared his throat, his hands clutching the podium tightly, the wood smooth beneath his rough fingers. He wasn't used to speaking anymore, especially not to so many faces turned toward him, waiting not for apology, but for his voice, for his truth. His voice, at first rough with disuse, gained strength with each word. "I didn't save lives for medals," he began, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces, blurring slightly as emotion rose, raw and profound. "I didn't fight for thanks." He paused, a pregnant silence hanging in the air. "I fought because a man doesn't leave others behind." A hush fell over the crowd, an almost reverent stillness. Then, his voice cracking slightly with vulnerability and deep emotion, he added, "But when you come home, you hope maybe that someone will come back for you too." The crowd seemed to breathe as one, 1,000 hearts breaking and mending in the same moment, understanding the unspoken weight of his words. A few people openly wept, their tears a testament to the profound resonance of his simple, powerful statement. After the ceremony, as twilight painted the town in hues of gold and lavender, MacAllister sat quietly on a bench in the park, the very same bench where he had once eaten scraps, his only company the biting winter wind. Beside him sat Ellie, Sarah's niece, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, a silent testament to rediscovered family, a beacon of hope for his future. Rocky, a gentle golden retriever service dog provided by a Veterans Foundation, dozed peacefully at MacAllister's feet, a loyal companion for the new chapters ahead. Children played nearby, their laughter ringing like tiny bells in the cool evening air, a melody of innocence and joy. The flag above City Hall fluttered softly in the gentle breeze, casting shifting shadows across MacAllister's face, a symbol of a nation beginning to truly see its heroes. He reached into his coat pocket and drew out Sarah's tattered photograph. "Found my way back, love," he whispered, tracing her smile with his thumb. "Just like you said I would." Above him, the first star of the evening blinked into existence, a tiny defiant pinprick of light against the deepening sky, and John MacAllister, invisible no longer, smiled into the coming night, a quiet peace settling over his weathered features. He knew now, with a certainty that warmed him from the inside out, that even the longest winters end, and even the most forgotten heroes can, truly, find their way home. MacAllister's story, once a whisper in the wind, had become a powerful anthem of resilience, compassion, and the enduring truth that no sacrifice is ever truly forgotten when a community chooses to remember. His journey galvanized Harmony Creek, inspiring new local initiatives for veteran support, from mental health programs to job training, ensuring no other hero would slip through the cracks. It was a legacy not just of personal triumph, but of communal awakening, a living testament to the power of one life to illuminate the path for many.